You may remember hearing about a Russian plane being grounded at Toronto's Pearson Airport last year.
Within hours of offloading that cargo, Canada closed its airspace to all Russian-operated aircraft because of the invasion of Ukraine.
Or maybe you don't remember that at all, because the plane has been sitting on that tarmac for well over a year without any updates. But here's why we're talking about it again.
We are one of the first countries to bring in specific legislation that allows us not just to ground this plane, but to actually seize it.
On a surprise trip to Kyiv, the Prime Minister announced plans to take the plane that's been parked in Toronto since shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine, and then either give it to Ukraine or sell it and give the money to Ukraine. So what do we know about this Antonov 124 cargo jet, and how angry is this going to make Russia? Well, first let's take a look at how the plane got here. It came from an undisclosed airport in China, then flew through Russia, making a quick stop, made one more in Anchorage, Alaska, before finally arriving in Toronto. It was carrying a shipment of COVID-19 rapid tests that Canada had ordered. The jet was then supposed to leave soon after making its delivery, but then
President Putin did a speech. It was actually a pre-recorded speech that was aired on Russian television, and in it he essentially declared war on Ukraine.
That same day,
in a move to further punish Russia, Canada joined several other Western countries banning Russian aircraft from its airspace.
And it's hard to take off if you're not allowed to be in the sky. That plane has been banned from leaving ever since. But why actively seize it? Like, couldn't they have just left it there until everything got back to normal? Well, according to Global Affairs, it's to put additional pressure on Russia to stop its illegal war against Ukraine by straining its economic system and limiting resources that fuel the war. And if that's not clear enough, here's what our Foreign Affairs Minister had to say. Canada is sending a clear message to the Russian regime that there will be nowhere left to hide for those who support and profit from the Kremlin's war of aggression. So this is a punishment, and Russia is kind of ticked off. Its foreign ministry calls this cynical and shameless theft. But is that true? Like, does Canada have a legal right to seize the plane? Well, as of about a year ago, the answer is yes. It passed a law stating that not only can it seize the assets of sanctioned people, it can also forfeit and divert those assets to the victims of sanctioned regimes.
So this new law is actually part of Canada's sanctions regime, the Special Economic Measures Act. The moment someone becomes listed as a designated sanctioned entity in Canada, whether a person or a corporation, their assets are subject to this new forfeiture regime.
Now, this is actually only the second time the law has been used. The first was in December, when the government seized $26 million US in financial assets held by a company believed to be owned by a Russian oligarch. So, the federal government's plan is for the plane or money from the sale of the plane to go to Ukraine ASAP.
We're going to do it as quickly as possible, but I can tell you, and the Ukrainians are very pleased that the path is started.
And I should say, this is more than just a symbolic gesture. Ottawa's fear, if it were to allow the plane to fly back home, is that it might bolster Russia's war effort.
This would be an asset that the Russian aviation, the Air Force, would certainly incorporate within its strategic lift capability and put to maximum effect in terms of its operations in Ukraine. It would enable the transport of supplies, even armor, even tanks that are being refurbished. And there is a plant, in fact, in Siberia that's actually doing this around the clock. And it would allow the Russians to bring them closer to the battlefield area and then to deploy to the fight.
Now, Russia says this is very serious, that diplomatic relations are on the verge of being severed, and says it is prepared to retaliate over what it calls stolen property.
I don't see any clear connection between this action and then a specific Russian result. I mean, Russia is at war. It will do whatever it takes to seize Ukraine. And this plane is one small pawn on the chessboard. We should keep in mind that the Russians actually confiscated over 400 planes that they had been leasing from Western companies when the war began, and have not given them back.
What I expect is more likely to happen is that the government of Russia will start sanctioning Canadian businesses that might have assets either in Russia or in occupied territories of Ukraine, such that they in turn can also do some sort of seizure or forfeiture. We're talking about things like patents and copyrights, mining licenses, marketing authorizations. All those sorts of things are also ripe for a form of seizure or forfeiture.
As for the Russian company that actually owns the plane?
Certainly, the company can formally apply to have the seizure lifted. That's an application to the minister. You'd essentially be asking her to reverse her position. The company, the Volga Dnepr Airlines, can certainly challenge that process in court. It has a right to receive notice and to defend itself. But the legal test there is really not in its favor, so long as the government has done the correct job in identifying the asset and who owns, holds, or controls it. The company would be in a very tough spot there.
And just to add insult to injury, every day the plane stays parked on the tarmac, the bill to the company keeps going up. At our last count, at about $1,000 a day, that's more than $500,000 for essentially a parking ticket. Though we realize there may not be much of an incentive to pay that parking ticket off for a vehicle you're about to forfeit anyway.